Story 1: The Twelfth Shadow. Every small town has its secrets, and Ridgeview was no exception. The high school football team, the Wolves, had one of the worst records in state history. But it wasn't just bad luck. Locals whispered about the curse of Ridgeview Stadium, a series of inexplicable tragedies that had plagued the team since the 1970s. The most infamous story was about Johnny Miller, the star running back who led the Wolves to the state championship. Johnny never made it to the game. His bus veered off a bridge, killing him and his teammates instantly. They buried Johnny in his Ridgeview jersey, number 12. No team had worn number 12 since. Not because it was retired, but because no one dared. Homecoming at Ridgeview was a tradition as much as a tragedy. The Wolves were losing as usual, with the scoreboard showing 28-7 in the fourth quarter. Jake Wilson, the team's quarterback, was about to call the huddle when a cold, heavy fog rolled onto the field. The air turned icy, the kind of chill that sinks into your bones. "Coach, is that normal?" Jake asked. Coach Dempsey shrugged, visibly uneasy. The crowd murmured, and some began leaving the bleachers. Then, through the fog, a figure emerged. He wore a tattered Ridgeview jersey, number 12. His helmet was old and cracked, as if it had been pulled from a grave. The figure joined the huddle without saying a word, his presence oppressive. "Who?" Jake started, but his words froze in his throat. The figure raised a hand and pointed to the opposing end zone. When the play began, number 12 moved like no one Jake had ever seen. His cuts were impossibly sharp, his speed unnatural. The Wolves scored 3 touchdowns in rapid succession, stunning the crowd and securing an impossible comeback. As the final whistle blew, the figure disappeared into the fog. The next morning, Jake woke to a room that smelled of damp earth. Muddy footprints led from his window to his bed. On his desk was his playbook, its pages torn and scribbled with words in a shaky hand. "Finish it." Over the next few weeks, strange phenomena followed the Wolves' winning streak. Players reported their lockers slamming shut on their own, equipment being moved, and hearing faint whispers in the showers. "Win it all." The team's star wide receiver, Mike, claimed he saw a figure in a number 12 jersey watching from the shadows during practice. The haunting escalated when Jake had a nightmare. He was back on the field, but it was silent and empty. The scoreboard flickered, showing 12, then 0-0. The fog rolled in and there stood number 12, his face skeletal beneath the cracked helmet. "You'll win," the ghost rasped, "but you'll never leave." On the night of the championship, the fog returned, thicker and colder than ever. The Wolves' bus wouldn't start, forcing them to ride in a borrowed vehicle, eerily similar to the one from the 1970s crash. Tension mounted as players whispered about Johnny Miller's curse. During the game, number 12 appeared again, leading the team to a miraculous victory. But as the final whistle blew, the lights flickered, and the air grew deathly still. Number 12 stood at midfield, his skeletal face revealed for all to see. "You finished it," he growled, "but now you're mine." The next morning, the entire team was gone. Their uniforms were left neatly folded on the field, and the championship trophy sat at the 50-yard line, covered in frost. Ridgeview Stadium remains abandoned, haunted by the echoes of its cursed history. Story 2: The Final Whistle. The Legend of Coach Hensley. In 1998, the Fairview Falcons were unstoppable. Undefeated throughout the season, they were one win away from a state championship. Their coach, Joe Iron Hensley, was revered for his no-nonsense leadership. But that fateful championship game ended not with glory, but with tragedy. As the team led their final huddle, Coach Hensley clutched his chest and collapsed. His final words, spoken to his assistant, became a dark legend: "Victory comes at a price." The team lost that day. Since then, Fairview had been cursed, never advancing past the playoffs. Players whispered about the Hensley curse, claiming his ghost lingered at the field, angry and vengeful. This year, the Falcons were stronger than ever. Led by their quarterback, Ethan Reynolds, they dominated the regular season. The curse seemed forgotten until the playoffs began. During their first playoff game, the scoreboard glitched. As Ethan scanned the field before a snap, the scoreboard displayed a chilling sequence: 1998. The numbers flashed for only a second, but Ethan's stomach sank. After the game, one of his teammates found his cleats covered in dirt, though the field had been pristine. The hauntings intensified during practice. Players reported feeling watched, though the stands were empty. Shadows moved unnaturally along the sidelines, and one lineman claimed he saw a figure in an old Falcons jacket standing by the goalpost. "He just stared," the lineman said, pale with fear, and then he disappeared. Ethan began to have nightmares. In one, he stood on the field alone as faceless fans watched from the stands. The grass turned to ash under his feet. Then Coach Hensley appeared, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken. "Win," he said, his voice echoing like a whistle. "But remember the cost." Desperate for answers, Ethan and his best friend Lucas sneaked into the school's archives late one night. Digging through dusty records, they found grainy footage of the 1998 championship. In the final moments, as the camera panned to Coach Hensley collapsing, a shadowy figure loomed behind him, pointing at the scoreboard. The figure's face was obscured, but it wore an old Falcons jersey, number 12. Next to the film reel was a journal belonging to Hensley. One entry caught Ethan's eye. "We're so close, but something isn't right. I see him every night now, the man in the stands. He wears a jersey I don't recognize, and he never looks away. It feels like a warning." The night of the championship, a storm rolled in, drenching the field in torrential rain. Lightning flashed as the Falcons took the field. The air was heavy, charged with electricity, and something else. Ethan felt it immediately. A suffocating presence. As the first play began, the scoreboard flickered and displayed, "One must fall." The haunting escalated with every snap. Players stumbled as unseen hands seemed to grab at their feet. The whistle of the referees sounded distorted, like screams. During halftime, Ethan saw muddy footprints leading from the locker room showers to his locker. Inside was an old, rusted whistle with a note, "Use it wisely." In the final moments of the game, the Falcons were one touchdown away from victory. As Ethan lined up for the snap, the stadium lights flickered out. For an agonizing 30 seconds, the field was pitch black. When the lights returned, the figure of Coach Hensley stood at the 50-yard line, his face twisted in fury. "Win!" his voice boomed, echoing across the field. Ethan threw the final pass, securing the touchdown. The Falcons won, but as the crowd erupted, Ethan collapsed. His teammates rushed to him, only to find his body cold and lifeless. His face was frozen in an expression of terror. The scoreboard flickered one last time. Debt paid. The next morning, the trophy room was found empty. The championship trophy lay on the field, cracked down the center. A single whistle, rusted and broken, sat atop it. Story 3: The Locker Room Echoes. 15 years ago, Kyle Turner was the golden boy of Blackwood High. The star running back with an unmatched talent, Kyle carried the hopes of an entire town. Everyone believed he was destined to lead the Vipers to their first ever state championship. But on the night of the semifinals, Kyle disappeared. His teammates found the locker room in disarray. Blood smeared the floor near Kyle's locker, and his helmet was left abandoned on the bench. The police searched the school grounds and nearby woods, but Kyle was never found. The team forfeited their championship run, and Coach Summers resigned abruptly the following week. Kyle's disappearance became a local legend. Some said he had run away, unable to handle the pressure. Others believed something more sinister had happened. Over time, stories of his ghost haunting the locker room began to spread. Players reported hearing footsteps when no one was around, lockers slamming shut, and whispers echoing through the vents. Kyle's old locker, number 22, was left untouched, a grim reminder of the school's darkest night. This year, the Blackwood Vipers had their strongest team in over a decade. Led by Nate Reynolds, the determined team captain, the Vipers were on a winning streak that had fans whispering about breaking the curse of Kyle Turner. But from the very first game, strange occurrences began to plague the team. After practice one evening, a lineman named Carter noticed his cleats were missing. He found them the next morning in Kyle's old locker, dripping wet and reeking of mildew. Another player, Josh, claimed to hear faint whispers while in the showers, though no one else was in the room. "It sounded like someone saying my name," he told Nate, his voice shaking. Things escalated when Nate found scratches on the wall near Kyle's locker that weren't there before. The scratches were deep and formed two words: "Find me." Despite the unease spreading through the team, Nate was determined to keep their focus on the championship. But the locker room's oppressive atmosphere made it harder every day. The air grew colder around Kyle's locker, and more players began reporting strange encounters. One night, during a late practice, the lights in the locker room flickered, plunging the room into darkness for several seconds. When they came back on, every locker door was wide open. Nate couldn't shake the feeling that Kyle was trying to reach out to them. One night, after practice, he stayed behind with a flashlight, determined to investigate Kyle's locker. It had been sealed shut for years, but when Nate approached, the air turned icy cold. His breath fogged in the air as he tugged on the rusted latch. As the locker creaked open, a foul stench filled the room. Inside, Nate found a folded note scrawled in shaky handwriting. The paper was yellowed with age, and the words read, "Summers knows, don't let me be forgotten." Confused and unnerved, Nate called a few teammates to help him investigate further. Together, they pried open the floorboards beneath Kyle's locker. What they discovered horrified them. In a hidden crawlspace lay skeletal remains. The bones were curled as if the person had died in agony. Clutched in one skeletal hand was a rusted football whistle, and beside the remains was a battered journal. The journal contained pages filled with desperate entries written by Kyle in his final days. One of the entries read, "Summers made me practice until I couldn't stand. When I said no more, he snapped. He dragged me here. I don't know how long I've been down here. I can hear him pacing above me. Please, someone find me." The discovery was reported to the authorities, but the story was quickly buried. The school claimed the remains were inconclusive, dismissing the journal as a prank. But the team knew better. This was Kyle. And now that they had disturbed his resting place, the hauntings became violent. From the moment Kyle's remains were uncovered, the locker room became a hotspot for supernatural activity. Showers turned on by themselves, mirrors fogged up with cryptic messages like, "Finish the game," and "Win for me." One player awoke in the middle of the night to find deep scratches on his arm spelling the word justice. During practice, Nate started seeing Kyle's ghost. At first, it was fleeting, a shadow at the edge of his vision or a flicker of movement on the field. But as the championship approached, the sightings became clearer. Kyle's spectral figure would stand near the goalpost, staring at Nate with hollow, glowing eyes. One night, Nate had a vivid dream. He was back in the locker room, but everything was different. The walls dripped with blood and the lights flickered erratically. Kyle stood in the center, his face pale and gaunt, his voice echoing as he whispered, "They forgot me. Don't let them forget." On the night of the championship, the atmosphere was charged with unease. The players felt it, the crowd sensed it, and even the referees seemed jumpy. As the Vipers took the field, a cold wind swept through the stadium, carrying with it the faint sound of a whistle. The game was brutal, with the Vipers trailing for most of the night. Then, in the final quarter, something extraordinary happened. The lights flickered, and the ghostly figure of Kyle Turner appeared at midfield. His presence electrified the team, and Nate swore he heard Kyle's voice in his ear saying, "Win for me." The Vipers rallied with a series of impossible plays, each one feeling like it was guided by an unseen force. As the clock wound down to the final seconds, Nate threw a Hail Mary pass that sealed their victory. The crowd erupted, but Nate felt a chill run down his spine. Standing in the end zone was Kyle's ghost, his face now peaceful. As the team celebrated, Kyle's ghost appeared one last time in the locker room. He pointed to the wall where the words "Thank you" appeared, glowing faintly before fading away. The locker room was sealed shortly after the championship, but the hauntings didn't stop. Players reported hearing Kyle's voice in their dreams, whispering, "Don't let them forget me." On stormy nights, locals claimed to see his ghost on the field, running drills under the flickering lights. Though the Vipers had finally broken their curse, the legacy of Kyle Turner remains a haunting reminder that some victories come at a cost. The question lingers, did Kyle find peace, or is he still watching, waiting for justice?